In the grim darkness of the 31st millennium, even a healer can become a herald of death. Such is the tale of Zadal Crosius, a once loyal apothecary of the Death Guard Legion, who would later be known as Necrosius the Undying. His saga spans the Great Crusade, the Horus Heresy, and the long millennia that followed, tracing his fall from dutiful medic to one of Nurgle's most feared plague sorcerers. His tale begins during the Great Crusade, when Zadal Crosius first served as an apothecary of the Death Guard Legion. As a medic of Mortarian's plague-ridden legion, he was devoted to preserving the lives of his battle brothers, honing the arts of battlefield medicine amid horrific war zones. At the outbreak of the Horus Heresy, Crosius remained fiercely loyal to his prime.
So let it be war!
Even as the War Master Horus rebelled against his steadfast loyalty to his due set the stage for Crosius's
From the skies of Terra to
Those dark events soon engulfed Crosius and his legion during their doomed voyage to Terra. En route to the throne world, the Death Guard fell victim to a terrible betrayal from within. First Captain Callus Typhon, the man whom Crosius and his brothers trusted as Mortarian's right hand, secretly murdered the fleet's navigators and led the Death Guard astray into the trackless depths of the warp. It was an act of perfidy committed as part of a dark pact with chaos, and its consequences were immediate and dire. Adrift in the Imperium, the fleet was stranded helplessly for what felt like an eternity, until the plague struck. A virulent outbreak of warp-borne disease, later called the Destroyer Plague, swept through every ship, inflicting unimaginable agony on the trapped astartes. Zadal Crosius and his fellow apothecaries desperately plied their craft, racing from one agonized brother to the next, determined to find some cure for the horrific afflictions ravaging the fleet. Every remedy, every serum, every ritual of purification they attempted was in vain. This was no natural sickness. It was the gift of Nurgle himself, a plague of the warp that laughed at mortal science. Still, Crosius refused to surrender. He toiled on even as space marines all around him coughed out their last breaths and collapsed in pools of filth. Yet the nightmare only escalated. Those Death Guard warriors who succumbed to the sickness didn't remain dead. They rose again, their bodies bloating and twisting into grotesque parodies of life. Plague-ridden corpses staggered through the flickering corridors of the warships, animated by the very disease that had slain them. Crosius looked on in mounting horror, unwilling to believe that all his medical skill had been rendered so utterly useless. In that moment of utter despair, a jovial, grandfatherly voice began to whisper to him from the shadows. Crosius heard the wet, buzzing laughter of Grandfather Nurgle, echoing in the rasp of diseased lungs and the drone of corpse flies. The plague god was speaking to him, offering a terrible salvation. Surrounded by living corpses and feeling the corruption swelling within his own flesh, apothecary Zadal Crosius finally accepted the awful truth. There would be no cure. The Death Guard had been damned by chaos, and the only path forward was to embrace the very plague that was destroying them. With a heavy heart and a soul on the brink of despair, Crosius made a fateful choice. He surrendered himself to Nurgle's gift and swore allegiance to the Lord of Decay. In that instant, the dutiful healer of old died in spirit, and a new plague-bringer was born in his place. In the days that followed, Zadal Crosius cast off his old role as caregiver. He discarded the symbolic tools of the apothecary and took up the mantle of a plague priest and sorcerer of Nurgle. With zeal only a true convert can know, he devoted his blighted knowledge entirely to the pursuit of death and demonology rather than healing. No longer would he mend flesh. Now he would rot it. Crosius studied how to channel the warp's foul energies, soon learning to reanimate the dead with a word and to inflict disease with a mere gesture. By the time the Death Guard fleet finally escaped from
Day
the warp's
by
clutches
day we tear
and emerged
Imperium
into real
nihilists
space,
from the despoil.
Zadal Crosius was utterly transformed. The apothecary who had once fought to save his brothers was gone. In his place stood a burgeoning plague sorcerer, well on his way to becoming the figure who would later be feared as Necrosius the Undying, though that name had not yet been spoken. When at last the plague-ravaged Death Guard fleet reached Terra, the final battle of the Heresy was already underway. Zadal Crosius and his battle brothers descended into the hellish fighting around the Imperial Palace, eager to enact vengeance after their torment in the warp. Crosius found himself in the thick of it at the Lion's Gate spaceport, a massive stronghold the Death Guard had seized on Terra's surface. There, the once medical officer fought shoulder to shoulder with his plague-ridden brethren to hold the line against the Emperor's defenders. When Jagatai Khan and his White Scars launched a ferocious assault to recapture the spaceport, Crosius proved instrumental in rallying the Death Guard to resist. Amid caustic, toxic fumes and relentless artillery bombardments, he kept his Marines fighting with grim resolve, displaying leadership far beyond what anyone expected from a mere apothecary. In the hellish trenches of the siege, the once obscure healer first showed the makings of a dark legend. A decisive turn came during the Siege of Terra, when Mortarion himself was banished from the battlefield. In a duel amidst the devastation, the Primarch of the Death Guard was cut down and cast into the warp by the White Scars Primarch, Jagatai Khan. With their Gene Father suddenly gone, the Death Guard were left momentarily leaderless and in chaos. Amid the confusion, Zadal Crosius took bold initiative, using a small nurgling demon given to him as a pet by First Captain Callus Typhon, the man who would one day be known as Typhus. Crosius managed to make psychic contact with Typhon across the war-torn city. He urged Typhon to assume command of the Legion in Mortarion's absence. Typhon, already the Legion's ambitious first captain, seized the opportunity. Backed by key officers like Mortarion's equerry, Kepha Morag, and bolstered by Apothecary Crosius's fervent support, Typhon rallied the Death Guard to continue the fight with renewed focus. Unaware of Typhon's earlier treachery, Crosius swore allegiance to his interim leadership, doing all he could to keep the Legion a cohesive and deadly force for the remainder of the siege. Under Typhon's command, the Death Guard even launched a bold strike on Terra's Astronomicon lighthouse, hoping to extinguish the Emperor's guiding beacon. That gambit was foiled by the defenders' desperate psychic counterattack, but it showed the lengths to which Typhon and his followers were willing to go. In those last days on Terra, Zadal Crosius's actions cemented his status among the Death Guard. Once just a battlefield healer, he had risen to become a frontline leader when fate demanded it. But even as the traitor legions fought tooth and nail, their grand rebellion was collapsing around them. The Siege of Terra ended in failure. Warmaster Horus was defeated, and the Emperor struck down his treacherous son aboard the Vengeful Spirit. With Horus's death, the surviving traitor forces scattered and fled. The Death Guard, battered and plague-ridden, withdrew from Terra along with the rest of Horus's armies. Zadal Crosius followed his brethren into exile, leaving behind the burning ruins of humanity's throne world and carrying the seeds of Nurgle's corruption with him. After the heresy's disastrous end, Zadal Crosius and the remnants of the Death Guard escaped into the eye of Terra. Far from the Emperor's reach, Mortarion led his legion to a demon-haunted world, gifted to him by Nurgle, the plague planet. where the Death Guard would rebuild in Nurgle's shadow. It was here that Crosius's dark transformation truly flourished. Fully embracing his new identity, he began to call himself Necrosius, as if to cast off his old life entirely. On the pestilent surface of the plague planet, Necrosius proved himself an extremely zealous devotee of Nurgle, fanatical even by the debased standards of the Death Guard. The bitterness in his heart allowed no master, except the plague god himself. While he still acknowledged Mortarion as his gene sire, any obedience Necrosius offered his Primarch was hollow and reluctant. In truth, he had no intention of being ruled by anyone save Grandfather Nurgle. Yet even amid the diseased camaraderie of Mortarion's new realm, Necrosius harbored a secret hatred. Through cryptic whispers and his own investigations, he eventually pieced together the truth of Typhon's betrayal. How it was Typhon's actions that had led the Legion into the warp trap and cursed them with Nurgle's plague in the first place. Necrosius could not forgive this treachery. The realization festered in what remained of his soul, and over the centuries it bloomed into open enmity. A bitter rivalry took root between those Death Guard who rallied under Necrosius's sinister vision and those who remained loyal to Typhon, now known as Typhus, Nurgle's favored herald. Typhus liked to style himself as Nurgle's primary champion, spreading plagues across the stars from the bridge of his infamous warship, the Terminus Est. But Necrosius saw himself as an equally chosen instrument of the plague god, one with his own destiny and no tolerance for Typhus's self-proclaimed authority. The two plague lords became like rival prophets of the same god, each vowing to outdo the other in spreading Nurgle's gifts across the galaxy. Empowered by Nurgle's unholy blessings, Necrosius soon began to gather followers who shared his fevered devotion. The most corrupted and fanatical warriors of the Death Guard, as well as other Chaos Marines drawn to Nurgle's creed, gradually flocked to his banner. With fiery sermons and plague-ridden oratory, Necrosius preached a new dark gospel. He taught that the gift of living death and eternal decay was Nurgle's ultimate blessing to all mankind. Many plague-bloated Astartes, enthralled by this morbid vision, swore themselves to his cause. These became the first members of his personal warband, a splinter cult he named the Apostles of Contagion. In time, Necrosius and his Apostles of Contagion severed ties with the main Death Guard Legion entirely. They became a roving plague cult beyond even Mortarion's control. Unfettered by the Primarch's commands or Typhus's agenda, the Apostles struck out on their own path through the stars. They wandered from world to world as heralds of disease and undeath, sowing contagion without restraint. To Necrosius, it mattered not whether their victims were imperial citizens or fellow heretics. All flesh was equally deserving of Nurgle's gifts, and none would be spared corruption. Thus began a millennium-spanning carnage that would make Necrosius one of the most feared plague lords in history. Across the war-torn Imperium, his name became synonymous with creeping death. He was soon known by the epithet, the Hand of Nurgle, proclaiming himself Nurgle's chosen instrument of plague and despair. Time and again, his sorcerous necromancy gave rise to the dreaded zombie plague on worlds unfortunate enough to encounter him. Necrosius had mastered the foul art of reanimation. He would deliberately blight entire populations with disease, then raise the planet's dead en masse as an army of shambling plague zombies to do his bidding. Whole star systems fell silent after his attentions, their populations first slain by exotic poxes, then made to rise from mass graves as laughing corpses in Nurgle's name. Imperial scholars record atrocities such as the Doriska genocides, and the blighting of the Eldar Maiden world Kurthraul as just two infamous examples of Necrosius's handiwork. His campaigns of plague were so widespread and indiscriminate that he earned enemies not only among the righteous defenders of humanity, but also among other Chaos warlords who balked at his destruction. Over the centuries, Necrosius was believed slain on multiple occasions, cut down by the blades of the Emperor's silent assassins, or blasted apart by the warp fire of rival sorcerers. Even the Thousand Sons arch-sorcerer Ahriman is said to have obliterated him once. Yet each time, Necrosius returned. His corpse would somehow knit itself back together, grotesquely restored by Nurgle's favor, crawling back from the brink of true death. This uncanny ability to survive every attempt on his life earned him the dreaded title, the Undying. Even his foes had to concede that if Necrosius was struck down, it was only a matter of time before he rose again. Among the many horrors unleashed by Necrosius, one campaign in particular cemented his legend in later centuries: the Siege of Vraks. This brutal war consumed the armory world of Vraks in the late 41st millennium and began as a simple rebellion before spiraling into a full-scale chaos uprising. Partway through this drawn-out slaughter, Necrosius and the Apostles of Contagion arrived unexpectedly on Vraks, an uninvited third party crashing into the war. He had not been summoned by the conflict's instigators. Indeed, Necrosius refused to swear fealty to the heretic Cardinal Zafan, who sparked the rebellion, or to the mighty Khorne warlord Zhufor, who sought glory in the fighting. Necrosius cared nothing for their chains of command. He pursued his own plague agenda amid the greater chaos. The Apostles of Contagion moved among Vrax's traitor militia like specters of decay, spreading despair, disease, and a feverish worship of Nurgle wherever they went. As the siege ground on and the battlefields of Vraks were blanketed with corpses, Necrosius prepared to unveil his greatest horror. At the height of the fighting, while Imperial siege lines and Chaos trenches alike were awash in blood and desperation, the Plague Sorcerer enacted a grand and blasphemous ritual. Tapping into the full measure of Nurgle's power, he called out across the Vale of Death, and thousands upon thousands of fallen soldiers suddenly stirred. The countless dead strewn in Vrax's trenches and mass graves clawed their way back to their feet. Imperial guardsmen and Chaos heretics alike rose again as pestilent puppets bound to Necrosius's will. In an instant, the battle was thrown into chaos as a new army of plague zombies shambled forward, hungry to kill the living. The already nightmarish siege descended into an unimaginable bloodbath. Friend and foe alike found themselves fending off the infectious claws of their own resurrected comrades. And amid that charnel spectacle, Necrosius could be heard croaking a dreadful vow over the carnage: "No flesh shall be spared." In that blasphemous utterance, the Plague Sorcerer made clear that no living being on Vraks, not a single soul, would escape Nurgle's final gift. To Necrosius, there were no innocents and no bystanders. All flesh was fated either to rot in death or to rise again in his plague hordes. The Siege of Vraks ultimately ground to a Pyrrhic conclusion. After 17 years of grueling warfare, the Imperium wrested back a shattered victory, but at an almost unthinkable cost. Millions lay dead on both sides, and the once bountiful world was reduced to a toxic wasteland choked with corpses and chemical poisons. In the final assault on the citadel, as the remaining Chaos forces were overrun, Necrosius simply vanished. The Plague Sorcerer slipped away amid the chaos and smoke, evading death or capture yet again. In the aftermath, the Inquisition scoured the carnage for any trace of him, But Necrosius the Undying was nowhere to be found. His current whereabouts remain unknown to Imperial authorities. However, scattered reports of the Apostles of Contagion during the 13th Black Crusade at the millennium's end suggest that Necrosius yet lives, carrying on his plague-wreathed mission in the shadows. For Zadal Crosius, the journey from healer to harbinger of plague was as total as it was tragic. In his early years, he had been a compassionate protector, genuinely passionate about safeguarding the lives and health of his fellow space marines. That altruism was slowly twisted and broken by the horrors of the heresy and the corrupting touch of Nurgle. The dedication that once drove Crosius to save lives was warped into a fanatical conviction that only through plague and death could he offer any meaning. As Necrosius, he became utterly devoted to Grandfather Nurgle's morbid creed, embracing disease, decay, and even undeath as sacred gifts rather than unspeakable horrors. He exhibits the zealous fervor of a true convert, a man who has inverted his principles and now believes with all his heart that he is delivering not damnation, but a grotesque form of salvation. In Necrosius's corrupted mind, he is no villain. In his eyes, the virulent diseases he spreads are blessings to be shared universally, a perverse kind of mercy, a nightmarish half-life that spares no soul from the destiny of Nurgle's embrace. This warped sense of benevolence underpins many of his actions. He truly believes he is offering a gift, not inflicting a curse. For all his damnation, Necrosius remains fiercely independent and prideful, even by the standards of Chaos Space Marines. He refuses to kneel before any authority save Nurgle himself. Not even Mortarion, now a towering demon prince, can truly command Necrosius's loyalty. He obeys his Primarch only superficially, and even then with thinly veiled disdain. As for Typhus, Necrosius's hatred burns with undiminished intensity. He holds Typhus personally responsible for the Death Guard's great suffering, since it was Typhon's treachery that led them into the Warp's clutches and plague. In Necrosius's eyes, Typhus stole power and prestige that he does not deserve. Long ago, Zadal Crosius once allied with callous Typhon out of necessity during the Siege of Terra, but that necessity died with the heresy. Ever since, Necrosius has regarded Typhus as a hated rival. Over the centuries, their two splinter factions, Necrosius's Apostles of Contagion and Typhus's own plague fleets, have clashed bitterly. Each cult vies to spread Nurgle's plagues farther and to prove itself the true favored herald of Grandfather Nurgle. This fratricidal rivalry within Nurgle's flock highlights the spiteful, bitter core of Necrosius's character. Indeed, he bends the knee to no master except Nurgle, a defiance that led him to break from Mortarion's ranks and set himself up as a plague warlord in his own right. It is instructive and chilling to compare Zadal Crosius to what he might have been had fate not intervened. Not all Death Guard warriors fell to corruption. One of them, Captain Nathaniel Garrow, miraculously resisted the touch of chaos and remained true to his oaths. Garrow stayed loyal to the Emperor, continuing to uphold the ideals of duty and sacrifice, even as the galaxy burned around him. Crosius, by stark contrast, became the dark reflection of those ideals. The vows he once swore to protect life were twisted into an obsession with spreading death. Where Garrow carried the burden of honor, Crosius would unmake it, all in the twisted hope of gifting his victims with eternal decay. And if any words define his legacy, they are these: no flesh shall be spared. This chilling mantra, croaked by Necrosius in the midst of battle, encapsulates how far Zadal Crosius fell from grace. In his later campaigns, he made it brutally clear that sparing even a single living being, leaving anyone untouched by Nurgle's blessings, would be, in his eyes, a betrayal of the destiny he envisioned for all flesh. It is the ultimate perversion of the healer's creed, where once Apothecary Crosius strove to save every life he could. Now no life at all is to be saved. Today, the name Zadal Crosius is scarcely remembered in Imperial records. It was long ago purged from most archives after the heresy. Only through scattered and secret sources has the truth been pieced together. The apostate sorcerer known as Necrosius the Undying was indeed once that very same Death Guard Apothecary whose loyalty was betrayed and whose soul was claimed by Nurgle. In the Ordo Malleus's hidden archives, his story stands as a cautionary exemplar of the Death Guard's fall from grace. Zadal Crosius's saga is a tragic arc from loyal legion medic to feared plague sorcerer, vividly illustrating the corrupting power of chaos, how even a guardian of life can be twisted into an agent of death when subjected to the warp's horrors. Remembered now only as Necrosius the Undying, that once obscure medic has claimed a dark place in the annals of the 14th Legion as one of Nurgle's most infamous champions. His tale exemplifies the personal cost of heresy and the twisted fate that befell so many of Mortarian's sons in its aftermath. In the end, Zadal Crosius stands as a dark legend of the Death Guard, a healer turned harbinger of plague, loyal only to the god of decay, and utterly intent on ensuring that no flesh shall be spared his master's gifts.